I want to start Shemona Esrei next week, but if we have time to give like a little introduction, happy to do that. Okay, we good? Is that a good spot? Okay, well, welcome back. Welcome back to everyone. It's been a few weeks. I know that Pesach is long past, but we mentioned before that it feels like it was months ago. So we'll say one more idea that I was thinking about during the last days of Pesach, connecting to Tefilah. So the pasuk in Tehillim, in Samach Ches, in pasuk Zayin, says that Motzi Asurim ba koshros. Ba koshros. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, ba koshros could be broken up, al tikrei ba koshros, ella bechi v'shoros. You have to break that word up. Bechi is of course crying, v'shoros or shiros would be song. And the Maharsha there explains that the Mitzrim, it's referring to the Shvi Shal Pesach, the seventh day of Pesach, when of course we had Kriyas Yamsuf, the Egyptians were killed. So the Mitzrim were bochim, they were crying, bakoshros, so they were the bechi, the first part. And who was the shira? Of course, that's Bnei Yisrael singing the shira as they mishorim. They were walking through unharmed, singing Az Yashir. So the Maharal says bechi Mitzrayim represents Midas Hadin. So this is an idea we've mentioned before, at least touched on before, where there's two elements of Tefilah. There's the Midas Hadin, there's the strict judgment. That's part of the element. That's the Bechi. And then the Shira Li Yisrael, the song for Klal Yisrael, that represents, of course, Midas HaRachamim. I was reading this Maharal over Yom Tov, and I was wondering, perhaps we could say, connecting to our shiur, that these are also the two ways we daven. There's Bechi, sometimes there's crying, represented by our understanding of the Midas Hadin, of our, I would say, the way it seems HaKadosh Baruch Hu is seemingly using his Midas Hadin for whatever reason in our lives, at various points in our lives. And then there's the Shira. Sometimes we have, as we've spoken about, it's Tefilah Shel Simcha. The Shira, where it's seemingly the Midas HaRachamim, where it's seemingly Hashem is having Rachamim on us and granting us, maybe not whatever we want, obviously, but within reason. I think that's this idea. There's Bechi, there's crying sometimes in our Tefilah, and there's also Shira. Two elements, total opposite ends of the spectrum. Generally speaking, probably the average Tefilah is somewhere in the middle, I would imagine. We all have what to daven for, and we all have what to be thankful for. Of course, we can always daven for more, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, believe it or not, wants us to daven for more. That's when the analogy runs dry with the child asking his or her parents for things. That's when the analogy runs dry, because at a certain point it becomes inappropriate and disrespectful to continuously ask for the same thing, while HaKadosh Baruch Hu may very well, as we see with the Eschanan, five tefillos from Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem might actually want us to ask for something 505 times. Whatever reason that is, and not necessarily the scope of an introductory remark to a shiur. But ultimately, that's this idea. I think it's Bechi and Shira, two different parts of our Tefilah. Just thinking that over Yom Tov. Okay, so we finished talking about the first pasuk, which is the majority of our time together for Shema. I wanted to really focus on the first pasuk, most important part of Shema. So we got up to the Ahavta. I think we started it, but we'll review quickly. So the Ahavta demands that we love Hashem, which is incredibly difficult. To love a human being is incredibly difficult. To love God, who we try to understand and try to know, but still tremendous amounts of mystery about the Creator. It's hard. It's difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. It's very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things we could do. B'chol levavcha, you have to love God with all your heart. The Mishnah Brachos tells us, b'chol levavcha means, we mentioned this last year, with both Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. Understanding that there's good, there's bad, what we perceive as bad, that's b'chol levavcha. Then we ask you to love Hashem, b'chol nafshecha, which is the most difficult thing to do, because afilu hu notel nafshecha. Even if God asks you to give up your life for the sake of the Ribono Shel Olam, which again, very few cases, but could happen theoretically. We have to be ready for that. It's like I always say, it's like being in the military. Right? You have to always be willing to. Once you put on that uniform, you have to be willing at any point to give up your life for your country. So it's the same logic, giving up your life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, except that it's very few cases that you would actually be asked to be Moser Nefesh for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, as the story goes, the Chol Nafshecha, the Mishnah Baruch Hu says that Rabbi Akiva was being tortured by the Romans, and he said, all my life I would agonize that I could not serve Hashem b'chol nafshecha. I could never actually serve God by saying, God, how do I serve you? With all my soul. That if you ask me to take my soul, that you ask me to die, I'll kiddush Hashem, I'll do it. That's great. I said it twice a day in Shema, says Rabbi Akiva, but I never actually said. I never fulfilled the mitzvah. Now I finally have the opportunity to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, that's a level of Rabbi Akiva. We're not saying that's the level we need to get to. We just need to be at a point where we need to realize that should we be asked to give up our lives for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, however difficult it may be, we would do so. Again, this is second generation at this point that has gone this long without having significant issues of being in exile. So this is second, maybe third, depending on how you're counting and depending on where your parents came from. But nonetheless, that's my understanding of B'chol Nafshecha. That's what the Gemara in Brachos says, Mishnah in Brachos. And finally, so it's B'chol Levavcha, with all your heart, B'chol Nafshecha, with all your soul. Finally, B'chol Yodecha, with all your money. Judaism is expensive. No one said it's cheap. Judaism is expensive.
Money?
I'm sorry? It could be. Two understandings, the Gemara, the Mishnah says, two possibilities. One is Yodecha, Mammon, your money. Judaism is expensive. Matzah is expensive. Right? Matzah, private Jewish education. It's like, I remember when I was growing up, and I don't know how it happened, but I came across someone in public school, or a parent whose children were in public school, and they made an off the cuff comment. I was a young child. Must not have been 5 or 6, but I wasn't 13 or 14, somewhere in the middle there. And they made a comment that public school, Baruch Hashem, thank God they don't have to pay for education. And I said, public school is free? You don't have to pay? You don't have to pay for tuition. You don't have to pay thousands of dollars. And however old I was, I knew enough that tuition was expensive, but not that my parents ever complained about that. They weren't they were not those types of parents. But I couldn't believe public school is free. Wow. I couldn't. Why? And then I went to my parents. Why aren't you sending me to public school? It's free. And there's busing. There's no busing for private schooling in Maryland, for those who don't know. But there's busing. You get bused for free to a school, and you don't have to have carpool. And you may not even know what carpool is because you never had to go through it. Although Friday or Christmas or New Year's maybe once a year, but we did it every year for 13 years of education. But nonetheless, those who have children in Baltimore know that they're basically about 30 years behind New York City. So they still don't have private education busing. They're working on it, but they've been saying that since I made this comment probably about 20 years ago. But nonetheless, Judaism, with all your mammon. Judaism expensive. Private school.
Yeah. Many decades ago, I used to work with someone who sent his children to Catholic school. And
that's also expensive.
No.
Oh.
No. It was
but it's private school, but yeah. I always
Yeah.
Right. The St. James School, I'm thinking of the high schools we used to play in basketball. St. James, Friends, McDonough, these were prep schools. Those were not cheap. But yes, those are Jesuit or Catholic schools that were not cheap, but yes. Certain Catholic schools are funded by the church and funded by yeah, that's true. Okay. I'm thinking of fancy campuses in Columbia, Maryland. But yes. Okay. So nonetheless, that's B'chol Mo'odecha. A different interpretation is not that it's Mammon, it's Modeh. So B'chol Mida, Umida Shemodeh Lecha, having Modeh. Interestingly enough. That it's sort of like the Mida Keneged Mida aspect. So however you act, however you act to others, God will act to you. We had this in Perek and Perek Avos last night. So that it's sort of a Mida, a measurement, but it's also Mida Keneged Mida. That however you act, your Midos that you have, Hashem is acting to you. So if you're patient, Hashem will be patient to you. If you're quick to anger, if you're quick to jump, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu may act like that. Davar acher b'chol miodecha lo. Okay, that's b'chol mida u'mida. That's the other interpretation, that it's more about the traits of us versus the traits of God. So either the word miodecha could mean mida, could refer to mammon, either way. Okay, so continuing in the Hafta, we learn a very important tenet of Judaism, I would say, if not one of the most important ideas from the beginning of the paragraph. Chayim Adam levarech al hara k'shem shevarech al tova. We believe that we are obligated. It's a good idea. It's a good level. We have an obligation to bless Hakadosh Baruch Hu. As crazy as that sounds, we must make a bracha what that means in the second. Kshem Shem Varech Al Tova. Just like we make a bracha on good, we make a bracha on things that we perceive as bad. Baruch Dainamis, right? We make a bracha. I mean, tell your non-Jewish colleagues or friends that you make a bracha when someone dies. It's a crazy concept if you really think about it. You make it with Shem Malchus at the shiva, at the funeral at least. I mean, this is a real bracha, just like you make a bracha for having a cup of coffee. Right? You make the same type of bracha. It's the same concept. If you understand what a bracha is, it's not a thank. I mean, we say this a lot because bracha soda, right? But it's not just thanking Hashem. We're not thanking Hashem for taking away a parent. We're identifying the need, and we're acknowledging the role of God's, I guess, the creation of, we're identifying, we're acknowledging God's role, God's will. And whether we appreciate it, whether we like it, whether it sits well and resonates with us, we still make that bracha. That's the way I understand a bracha, because there's no way you could say it's simply thanking Hashem. You could say, thank Hashem for the life of my great-grandmother who passed away in her sleep at the age of 101. Fine. I don't think that's incredibly inappropriate, but we don't say thank you for deaths. That's usually not something, that's not a level, I don't know, that we're supposed to aspire to in this world. We're supposed to acknowledge that it was Hashem. That's a level. I don't know that we're supposed to acknowledge, thank you so much. Wow. I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me. So I think the bracha it's a little different, but that's the bracha. How do we know that? Shnei, as the pasuk says, you have to always love Hashem. You have to always be thinking of Hashem. That's why it's one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult mitzvahs, because I'm supposed to acknowledge that at a terrible time of tragedy, perhaps I'm still supposed to love Hashem. It's obviously incredibly difficult. Okay, so that's v'ahavta. V'haya, the second paragraph. So we already learned v'shinamtem levanecha in the first paragraph of Shema. You'll notice v'shinamtem levanecha, teach your children, mitzvah to teach them Torah. We have v'limadatem osam es benechem in the second paragraph, which is essentially, seemingly the same thing. Again, teach your children. Same idea. So Rav Soloveitchik explained that v'shinamtem levanecha in the first paragraph, interestingly enough, refers to the relationship between a teacher and his or her students. Rabbi and the students, let's say. That is v'shinamtem levanecha. V'limadatem osam es benechem, which is the second. Literally means it should v'shinamtem levanecha. It should teach v'shinamtem on your lips to your children. V'shinamtem levanecha, first paragraph of Shema v'ahavta. Then v'limadatem osam is literally v'limadatem osam. The lamad is to teach. V'shinamtem, I think he uttered on there. Is that the official translation there? I don't know if you see it. If you have the Hebrew English, v'shinamtem levanecha, it should be on your lips. I've heard that's one. There's a more.
Isn't it repeating?
Yeah, so it's repeating. It's two of the same commandments essentially in two paragraphs of Shema.
No, I meant v'shinamtem. Doesn't it mean teaching?
Yeah, to make sure the Gemara says until it's on their lips, like until it's like so easily, readily accessible, where they are going over. They know it by heart. Shagor v'piv, I believe, is the lashon. It's like fluent in your mouth. It's like if you've seen, thank you. It's like if you've seen like a chazan daven Yom Noraim, he knows it perfectly versus someone who's doing it for the first time. You just know this. You know the difference. Doesn't mean they don't do a good job, but yeah. So he translates them. V'shinamtem levanecha. Teach them thoroughly. Yeah. Like make it. Teach them incredibly well. V'shinamtem could be like repeating. I like that. Mishnah is to repeat, to teach. Right? Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Okay. So that's this idea. The V'limadatem osam es benechem refers to the parent-child relationship. That we have a responsibility to teach our children and grandchildren, by the way, for those keeping score at home. You have a mitzvah to ensure that your grandchildren are being cared for, obviously, but also taught Torah. Just like you had a mitzvah, and still do, according to many, to teach your children, nieces, nephews. You have an opportunity, whoever will listen. How about that? To teach them Torah, so you have that continues the next generation. Okay, Rashi and Akev says, right, that Misha she'aben yodeh ledaber, as soon as a child learns how to speak, that's usually the first mitzvah, which is in many ways the simcha of an upsharing, right? Because it's really a birthday party, and it's not my minhag, but you'll notice that all my children have had or will have upsharing. So that's because it's apparently Amanda took on the minhag because she thought it was cute. But that's not written in the Shulchan Aruch. That's written in my Ksuba. But yes.
There's two ways you can teach.
Yeah.
One is by action,
That's right.
and one is by text.
Very good. So limadatim osam es b'neichem, right? So there's lama'aseh, there's doing, action, and then there's the actual learning. Very good. I agree. Absolutely. Rambam says that as well. So mishasha ben yodea ledaber. As soon as the child is able to speak, limdeu, you should teach them Torah tzivah Moshe. Right? This isn't like a made-up thing. This is a halacha. Rashi brings it down that as soon as the child can speak, that's where the mitzvah chinuch begins. Perhaps even before, but at the very least, that's where it definitively begins, for sure. Okay, so continuing this idea of teaching one's children, the Gemara in Kedushin does say, "Limadatim osam es b'neichem." It was interpreted as parents only have their. I'm noticing that I am teaching all women. I know this when I say this. That was originally interpreted that parents only have the mitzvah to teach their sons Torah, not their daughters. Right? V'limadatim osam es b'neichem, b'neichem v'lo b'noseichem. The Gemara says. The Chavetz Chaim, we spoke about at the beginning of our shiur, really, at the beginning of the year, a very important psak, if you will, a very important idea of halacha was about more than 100 years ago at this point, 115 years ago or so, when he said that this is applying to women. I mean, for many years, we could go through Jewish history, we know this. We know Jewish education, women's Jewish education was not done, was not taken care of until about the Chavetz Chaim. We're talking over 100 years ago. He held we definitely have an obligation to teach Torah to our daughters as well.
When you have a class of boys and girls, you say Yeladim.
Right. That's what I tell my girls. That's anytime you say b'neichem, b'noteichem, right? It's always plural can mean male and female.
Children is a
correct. Banim can even mean boys, but we see this throughout Tanakh. Banim can refer to boys and girls. Absolutely. So that's Pashut Baruch Hashem.
Your children.
Correct. Yeah, Art School's translating like in a very politically correct. No, Art School's translating like Chavetz Chaim would want them to translate. That it's referring to children. That's the famous question. A father with 5 daughters doesn't have a mitzvah to teach you. Of course. I mean, you still have you have a responsibility to pay for Jewish education for your children. That's one of the responsibilities a parent has on his or her children. So that would include a Beis Yaakov or wherever, a girls' school as well. It's not only
Back
for.
in Europe, they had a Milano that would come to the house. And
correct. Those who are wealthy could afford that, and those who weren't wouldn't have that, and the children wouldn't be educated. Exactly. It's a big problem. It's a significant problem. There wasn't you couldn't ask for financial aid from the Rabbi, from the Malamed, right? It wouldn't work like that. It's his only income, the only source of income. It's getting paid by the child. So it wouldn't work like that. Sometimes there was a chesed case that, people in the community would help out, but it's a little different than today. A lot different than today. But Baruch Hashem, we're basing our shiur on the psak of the Chavetz Chaim, that there's a mitzvah for women to learn Torah, and we are going with that, otherwise we wouldn't have the shiur, if you think about it. But women's education in Judaic women's education has come a long way, thanks large in part to the Chavetz Chaim about 115 years ago, saying that we're really doing this a disservice to all our women. Of course, the Chavetz Chaim had 3 daughters. Sarah Shiur too. But that was right out. Yeah, Sarah Shiur is in Poland, so we're already, once we get to Sarah Shiur, that's like pre-World War II. That's a little after the Chavetz Chaim's psak at the Aguda Convention. Sarah Shiur was the first to say, okay, fine, Chavetz Chaim tells us we need to educate our women, so now we need an educational system, we need an educational model, we need a curriculum. We can't just, okay, girls go, let's daven, girls, let's learn Chumash. No, we need a curriculum. So she instituted the Beis Yaakov system. As a divorced woman in the early 20th century who was a dressmaker, right? Who did not think that she had anything to offer the world because she said, I'm a simple divorcee dressmaker, which again, in those times, unfortunately, there was a significant stigma to the word grusha, to the word divorcee, and that's what she did. That she developed a system that is in the entire Orthodox world today, in the entire world, that she instituted. But absolutely. So that was a little after the Chavetz Chaim's psak. That was at a Aguda convention, early 20th century. So she was also early 20th century Poland, but a little after. So she instituted the psak. Okay, so Vayomer, last paragraph of Shema. So I thought this was interesting. The Rashash says that in the last paragraph of Shema, there are 72 words, you'll notice. 72 words in Shema. Keneged, what's 72? 72 letter name of Hashem. So 72 words in the paragraph, 72 letter name of Hashem. Now we mentioned this over Yom Tov a little bit, but how often are we supposed to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim? I know you want to say every Pesach. That's not true. That's not true. Every day. The Mishnah explains in Brachos. The Torah tells us to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every single day. We have a mitzvah d'oraisa, a biblical obligation to remember Mitzrayim. Then the question becomes, what are we doing? Leil Seder, fine. We have a mitzvah lahagid. A Haggadah is to show, is to teach, is to illustrate, is to verbalize. Okay, there's a lot more there. But nonetheless, there's a mitzvah, a biblical obligation for us to remember the Exodus every single day. You have to remember it every single day. It's very clear. I don't know why this one got forgotten. But we have a mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every single day. Okay, the Rambam connects the mitzvah of Shema with the obligation of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the way many understand the Rambam is that remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim is not its own mitzvah, it's part of the mitzvah of Shema. So he kind of includes it, okay, so we're supposed to remember it every day. We're supposed to remember Shema every single day of our lives. Kol yemei chayecha, not a problem, we'll just throw it in Shema. That's the way the Rambam understands. Not everyone agrees with that. It says it's part of Shema for other reasons, but the Rambam says it's part of the mitzvah of Shema. That's sort of like a part A, part B type of situation. And the Gemara earlier in Brachos says that this paragraph of Vayomer has 5 parts to it. Sheish b'chamisha dvarim. There is the mitzvah tzitzis, mitzvah of tzitzis, a very important part of Shema, the last paragraph. Yetzias Mitzrayim, we just mentioned, leaving Egypt. All the mitzvahs, the concept of accepting all mitzvahs, the yoke of our responsibility to perform mitzvahs in this world. The das minim, we'll get to that in Shemona Esrei, das minim, understanding the minds of heretics, which was a significant problem, still is. We're not talking about the Enlightenment period, we'll talk about even before that. The minim, the heretics. Hirhor havera, right, that number, depending on how you're counting. Hirhor havera, I think, goes along with Hirhor avodah zarah. There's 2. Hirhor havera, thinking of avera, and Hirhor avodah zarah, thinking of avodah zarah. Okay, so we'll talk about those throughout, but those are all mentioned in various shapes and forms throughout that last paragraph of Shema. 5 important matters. Last but not least, Hashem Elokeichem Emes, and with this we'll end. So Hashem Elokeichem Emes, those 3 words, we spoke about Kel Melech Ne'eman, the first 3 words before. Hashem Elokeichem Emes, is the last 3 words, the 3 words after. So the Gemara in Brachos says you're not allowed to interrupt in between Hashem Elokeichem. That's really the end of the paragraph. Emes is the beginning of the next paragraph, you'll notice. Hashem Elokeichem, that's where the Torah's description. Remember we mentioned that the 3 paragraphs of Shema are in 3 different points of the Torah. So it ends Hashem Elokeichem. Emes is not from the Torah. Doesn't mean it's not important, as we'll see. But it's not from the Torah. The Gemara says, Halachik Rabbi Yehuda, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar who says, Bein Elokeichem le'emes v'yatzid lo yafsik. You shouldn't stop between Hashem Elokeichem. It doesn't go period and comma, emes. No, it goes Hashem Elokeichem emes. Why? So the Erech Lechem explains that emes, of course, means truth. The Erech Lechem lived many years ago. We'll speak about it in a little bit. It's a good question. I believe, I have to double check, but I believe a few hundred years ago. I have to double check that. But he says that the emes means something, a footnote, and a sefer that means truth. Well, for that we know. So we're connecting Hashem Elokeichem, so many others say this as well, Hashem Elokeichem to say his signature characteristic. Hashem Elokeichem, sort of like colon, emes. Like Hashem is your Hashem Elokeichem, Hashem your God, emes. That is his name. That is his entity. That is all that God is emes. That's one way you could understand this connection. But either way, it should go hand in hand. It should go Hashem Elokeichem emes. Then we go into the next paragraph as well. Okay, so additionally, the Gemara ties this phrase to the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Parak Yud, pasuk Yud. Hashem Elokeichem emes, hu Elokim chayim u'melech olam. So that's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, part of which we say every day. Similar, again, this idea that we take psukim in Tanakh and we sort of like change it a little bit. Similarly, we see that by Tehillim as well. So Hashem Elokeichem emes, that's where it comes from. It's based off of a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. So that's where the connection, I should say, Hashem Elokeichem is in the Torah. Emes is not, but Hashem Elokeichem emes is a pasuk in Yirmiyah. So it's not as if we're creating our own pasuk. It is based off a pasuk in Yirmiyah. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. Then we get to Shemona Esrei, which is fun.